Hey, true crime fanatics, this is Claire.
And I'm Andy.
You're tuned in to the Homicide Hobbies podcast, which is a podcast for people who love to hear about the horrendous crimes that people commit. Enjoy. What do you have today?
So our win is June 24th, 1993. Our where is a place called Bayou City.
Is it in the bayou?
Thanks to its winding waterways that flow through the city's surrounding areas. Do you want to give a guess as to where we're going to be today?
New Orleans.
That's what I thought too, because when they kept referring to the bayous, I was
Louisiana.
like, nope. Another nickname, another clue for you there, Claire. It's also referenced as Space City since it's home to the mission control of NASA's manned space flight program.
Florida?
Today, we'll be in Houston, Texas.
That was close.
All right. Just to hop into this, you're going to need a pen and paper or really have your brain whole paying attention. I did text you a timeline, or not a timeline, but like a list of who everybody is so that it kind of helps with any notes if you need them. But we're going to start off, and I'm going to tell you about Elizabeth Christine Pena. She was born June 21st, 1977. She was an only child, and her best friend was a girl named Jennifer Lee Ertman. Jennifer was born August 16th, 1978. Elizabeth was 15, and Jennifer was 13. Before the girls became friends, Elizabeth was becoming a little bit of an out-of-control teenager. She was starting to rebel against her parents, the whole boy thing, lots of makeup, just kind of getting to be an out-of-control 15-year-old. Now, in contrast, we have Jennifer, who is more of a conservative young lady. She had just started dabbling with makeup, and she was generally known to be a very good girl. Elizabeth's dad, he was kind of relieved when the girls became friends because fortunately, Jennifer's good girl persona helped Elizabeth get through her shenanigans and get everything together right before they enrolled in Waltrip High School together in 1992. Now we're going to hop forward a year. Elizabeth is now 16 and Jennifer's 14, and they are absolutely best friends, and they're both doing great.
Mm-hmm.
On June 24th, 1993, Jennifer's dad, Randy, dropped his only daughter off at Elizabeth's house around 4 in the afternoon. Around 8 p.m. that evening, Elizabeth's mom, Melissa, drove both Elizabeth and Jennifer to another girl's house named Gina. Gina lived in an apartment, and she was hosting a pool party for some of their friends.
How old is Gina?
She's the same age, like between 14 and 16. I think she's a little bit on the older side, but there's a group of girls, and they go to school together, and they're just hanging out. As Elizabeth and Jennifer excitedly hop out of Melissa's car, Elizabeth promised her mom that they would be home by their agreed-upon 11:30 curfew. Elizabeth and Jennifer sunbathed, they swam, they goofed off with their friends. In the meantime, while the girls were splishing and a-splashing, a group of young men, or older teens, however you want to look at it, who are a part of a gang, or a wannabe gang, called Black and White. Stupid name, but whatever.
Did you say what year this is?
1993.
Okay.
So the gang, Black and White, were holding a gang initiation to fight in 17-year-old Raul Villarreal. Raul had never been in a gang before.
This is happening at the same time, or this is happening at Gina's party?
No, this is happening at the same time. Like, the girls are off swimming, and meanwhile, we've got a group of boys who are being a bunch of idiots. They think they're a gang. The police know them as a wannabe gang, and the boys are all a bunch of trouble. Okay, I'm going to tell you about that here in a second. Now, Raul's initiation ceremony would consist of Raul being forced to fight each of the gang members for 5 minutes per person. That's a long time. Granted, there's only 7 members in the gang, but still, I couldn't imagine sitting here fighting somebody or a bunch of people for 35 minutes.
Does he get breaks?
No, and it's not even fair because when he's 15 minutes in, the next feller he's fighting is not worn out like he is. So he's just getting his ass whooped.
That's part of the initiation, I guess.
Yeah. Well, if he successfully fought, then the Black and White gang would decide whether or not to accept him as one of their own.
If he lived.
Right, but oh my God. You mean he could fight and they could be like, yeah, no, you still can't be here? No, that would suck.
It depends if he cries.
By 11:30 p.m., Raul had successfully beaten 2 of the gang members, but halfway through the third fight with 18-year-old Derrick O'Brien, Raul lost. He was briefly knocked unconscious, and the gang were deciding whether or not to let Raul in. The leader of the group was Peter Cantu. He was 18. When Raul was waking up complaining and moaning of being in pain, he looked up and Peter was standing over him and told Raul that he was in. He said that Raul was a badass and was welcome to hang out with them anytime. The group of young men then sat around just chilling, throwing back beers and chatting, kind of talking shit to each other, just sharing stories.
Do they all go to the same school as Elizabeth and Jennifer, or this is like completely unrelated? Like, do the girls know of this gang?
I think so. I tried to look that up. I think Gina knows Derrick because there is a part where Gina crosses paths with Derrick and she recognizes him. So I'm pretty sure they do. But the girls are a lot younger than the boys. So you figure if the boys had graduated or are seniors or just in general dropped out of school, the girls are like in 9th grade. So
Right.
I don't know how much they actually interacted with each other. There were 2 men in the gang. They were identical twins, Frank and Ramon Sandoval. They left the initiation ceremony after having a few beers, and they started walking home. Now, the group of wannabe gang boys, they had a real bad reputation for being a group of violent teens. 6 months prior to Raul's initiation, 3 of the gang members had raped, mutilated, and murdered a 27-year-old woman in a Houston park.
Ooh.
Another gang member, Efrain Perez, he was only 17, and he had already fatally shot a man named Jose Acosta. And another gang member was suspected of an almost fatal shooting of another teenage boy named Gary Ford. So they're not a group of good boys. It's not like they're just hanging out. They're trying to become, I guess, with a roll of my eyes, a legitimate, to be feared gang. Meanwhile, while the boys were being morons, the girls lost track of time, and when they realized it was a little after 11, and they were going to be late for curfew if they didn't skedaddle, they decided to head home through a shortcut that followed the railroad tracks, which passed through T.C. Jester Park, which was only 1 mile from Elizabeth's house. So they were so close to being home.
Is this during the summer?
Yeah, it's June 24th.
Okay, so they're about to go into their freshman year.
They probably just finished their freshman year.
Yeah.
So they cut through the park, and I did look it up. The park is 2.5 miles, so it is a decent-sized park, but they're cutting down the railroad tracks. Elizabeth and Jennifer walked past the twin brothers that I told you left to go home, and they were going opposite directions. Now, another one of the black and white members, 18-year-old Jose Medellin, he copped a feel on Elizabeth and then reached over and pinched 14-year-old Jennifer's breast.
It was the time period of titty twisters.
Well, Elizabeth smacked his hand away.
Well, who wouldn't?
So I think Elizabeth was a little more experienced with boys because she is 16.
Doesn't matter. She's walking home and she just got a titty twister.
Right. So it didn't catch her off guard because boys can be pigs. No offense to the boys out there that aren't pigs, but she's a teenage girl. She's been around teenage boys. She smacks his hand away like, what the hell?
He gets offended.
Jennifer, when he pinched her boob, she didn't really react. It was more of a and just kind of kept going. But when Elizabeth smacked his hand away, Jose got upset and said, "No, baby, where are you going?" Then he grabbed Elizabeth by her wrist, yanked her back, wrapped his arm around her neck, and threw her to the ground while yelling at her, "You ain't going nowhere." Jose then began dragging Elizabeth down a gravel decline towards the rest of the gang members. Elizabeth was screaming and kicking, and she was crying and begging for help. Jennifer, 14 years old, not used to being around anything crazy, she was horrified watching this stranger manhandle her friend and dragging her away into the darkness. Not knowing what to do, because this is pre-cell phone era, Jennifer tried to run to Elizabeth to try to stop this guy from hurting her, not realizing there were 5 more men in the darkness. Jose was ripping off Elizabeth's underwear as gang leader Peter and another gang member, Derrick, grabbed Jennifer and throw her to the ground. The twins that I had mentioned that the girls had walked past, Frank and Ramon, they witnessed everything. They watched from a distance as their fellow 6 gang members proceeded to repeatedly rape Elizabeth and Jennifer for more than an hour. Now, Frank and Ramon did not participate in the abductions or the rapes.
But they didn't help either.
They also continued their walk home and did absolutely nothing to save these girls from being brutalized. When they weren't being raped, the gang members were beating the girls. The girls would occasionally see each other being beaten or raped, and the girls continued to fight back against their attackers. Elizabeth kept kicking at the men, and Jennifer, she was a biter. The more the girls fought back, the more excited the men became, and they kind of like egged each other on, and the girls just became like...
They just took turns beating somebody who was going to be their new buddy. So why, why would you think they'd do any different?
Right. While Elizabeth was being gang raped by 2 of the gang members, she sobbed as she watched Jennifer, who was a virgin prior to this attack, being raped by a gang member, Efrain Perez. Eventually, Jennifer just laid on the ground weeping and begging for whichever penis was violating her to please stop. Her tears and pleas for help fell on deaf ears. These poor girls just went through hell. The piece of shit leader, Peter, ordered the gang members to go kill the girls so they can't identify them. But Peter ordered Jose's younger brother, Venancio, to stay behind because he was too young to see what was going to happen. Now, mind you, he did participate in the rapes, but he was just 14, so they didn't want him to participate in the murders. Good to know they have a line. The men forced the brutalized girls into the woods. Jose and Efrain each grabbed Elizabeth by her arms and legs, and Elizabeth barely had any fight left in her. Derrick and the newly initiated Raul forced the 14-year-old Jennifer towards the wooded area as well. Raul shouted, "Get on your knees, bitch," at Jennifer, and Raul and Derrick began strangling Jennifer with Derrick's red nylon belt. They wrapped the belt around Jennifer's neck, and with Derrick holding onto one end of the belt and Raul holding onto the other, they each pulled the belt tight. They used so much force that the belt eventually snapped. Jennifer crumpled to the ground. Elizabeth was forced to watch this whole thing. While Jennifer laid lifeless on the ground, Elizabeth tried to plead with the gang members to please spare her life. She even offered them her home number so they could call her for a good time. But nothing was working, so in a final attempt to live, Elizabeth tried to run. Unfortunately, Elizabeth was already badly beaten, and she didn't escape for too long because the ringleader, Peter, tackled the 16-year-old. Peter then repeatedly kicked Elizabeth in the face with his steel-toed boot, knocking out 3 of her teeth. He also repeatedly kicked her in the chest, fracturing several of her ribs. Peter, Jose, and Efrain then strangle Elizabeth using shoelaces from Efrain's shoes. Just before Elizabeth collapsed, Jennifer began to stir. Jose was frustrated and exclaimed, "This bitch just won't die." Raul then walked over to Jennifer and began stomping on her neck, laughing while he crushed her throat beneath his foot. Derrick joined in on the stomping of Jennifer. Seeing that this seemed to be a great idea, the rest of the men began taking turns stomping on both girls' necks, crushing their throats beneath their feet.
Does one of them live?
No. Before leaving the girls' remains behind, Peter took something. Peter then returned to Venancio and handed him Jennifer's goofy wristwatch he'd just removed from the dead girl's wrist, telling him, "Take this. I don't want it." Peter, the gang leader, he lived with his brother, Joe Cantu, and Joe's wife, Christina. That night, after the rape, they all headed back to Peter's or Joe's house, however you want to look at it. Somehow Peter was behind the group, so the rest of them arrived. So Jose, Efrain, and Raul walk into Peter's house that he shared with his brother and sister-in-law. So Christina took one look at the boys that walked through the door and immediately started questioning their appearances. She didn't know Raul, but she looked at him and was like, "Why is this kid bleeding? Why is Efrain's shirt covered in blood? Why was there blood on the crotch of Efrain's jeans? Why did Jose have a big red scratch across his neck? And dirt all over his clothes?"
What time was it that they got home?
Oh, it was late.
We're talking 11 o'clock still, I guess. Yeah, probably around
No,
midnight. You said they got raped for an hour and they headed home around 11.
Yeah, it was over an hour. So we've crossed into the next day. Raul, Christina, like I said, she didn't know this little punk. But she did notice that he also had bruises all over his face, bloodied knuckles, and dried blood on his clothes. She was just like, what the heck happened to you guys? To which Jose interrupted Christina's interrogation by saying their gang had a night of fun and that she'd be able to read about the details in the news. Jose, Efrain, and Raul then began to brag in detail to Christina about how they raped 2 girls. While the teenage boys took turns getting themselves cleaned up, Hosea began telling Christina and Joe about the events that unfolded that evening. The horrified couple sat there as he described how he got the virgin's blood all over his clothes from them white bitches. As the teenage boys laughed and they gave out the horrific details, little did the 3 teenagers know Christina herself had been gang raped when she was just 15.
Oh, shit.
So this really struck a chord with her. Peter reappeared with items they'd stolen off the girls, and then the men, or the boys, I'm not even going to refer to them as men because they're freaking little,
I wouldn't.
they're boys. And they sat around and divided their loot among the members. Jose was excited because he took a ring with an E on it so he could gift that to his girlfriend Esther.
It's disgusting.
It really is. Joe, the brother of the gang leader Peter, then asked the million-dollar question. What happened to the girls? Excited about his newfound treasures, Jose then let it slip that he felt that killing the girls would have been easier if they would have just had a gun. Peter and the other gang members then volunteered information saying they had to kill them 2 bitches so they can't call them cops. And after 2 hours of listening to these punks laugh about beating the girls and raping them, Christina had to excuse herself and she went to her bedroom where she began to cry. Joe soon appeared at his wife's side trying to console her. So that's what's going on in that house right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And around 4 a.m., Jennifer's mother, Sandra, woke up and realized the girls were not home. And thinking it was an act of rebellion, she went back to bed a little annoyed. At 6 in the morning, her husband Randy woke up and noticed the girls still weren't home. Confused about the girls' whereabouts, they just hoped that the girls had spent the night at Gina's apartment. But by 11 a.m. and still no word from the girls, they were trying to hold back the panic.
Yeah, thinking that they're just staying out late being little assholes, letting them worry all night.
Right, and now we're at 11 o'clock in the morning the next day, and...
Where are they?
Yeah, so they try to stay calm, but the worried parents thought that maybe they decided to sleep at Elizabeth's house. So they called the other girl's house, and when there's no answer, they figure maybe the girls are there and they're just sleeping in because they had a long night, swimming, the sun. That can be exhausting.
Mm-hmm. Not assuming their daughters got raped and murdered overnight.
Right. So by 2 p.m., the 4 parents...
Are full-fledged panicked?
They decided to meet up because doing this whole, where are the girls? Are they at your house? They're not at my house. And trying to figure out, when is the last time anybody saw them at this point? Adolf and Melissa Pena hadn't seen or heard from the girls since Melissa had dropped them off at Gina's house or at her apartment.
Well, who was home there?
They went to work. So from my interpretation of this, Randy dropped Jennifer off at Elizabeth's house, right? And then Elizabeth's mom, Melissa, dropped the girls off at Gina's apartment. And the girls were supposed to go back to Jennifer's house to spend the night.
Right.
But they never showed up. So Jennifer's parents were like, well, maybe Jennifer spent the night at Elizabeth's, and Elizabeth's parents just assumed that the girls made it safely back to Jennifer's, and they continued on with their day, and they went to work the next morning, not realizing that things were amiss. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The parents all meet up. They realize none of the adults had seen or heard from the girls, so they go to Gina's apartment and learn that the girls left together around 10:45, 11 o'clock, and should have arrived to Jennifer's home around curfew. So now, full-fledged panic is set in. The parents call 911 from the Pena home and report the girls missing. Police and volunteers gather and help search for the missing girls in a 60-mile radius from where the girls were last seen. While that's going on, the gang leader, Peter's sister-in-law, Christina, and Peter's older brother, Joe, are discussing the things that the boys had confessed to them. Christina convinced Joe to turn in his own brother and the loser pals that he hangs out with. Christina convinced her husband to call Crime Stoppers instead of the police because he could report the information anonymously. The following day, he made sure his violent brother, Peter, wasn't home before Joe made that call to Crime Stoppers. He told the person on the phone in a hushed tone that the police could find the missing girls' bodies in that park. He didn't tell them anything about the gang members, just where to find the girls' bodies. Now, Joe and Christina kind of sat back and watched the news when nightfall came and there was nothing about finding the girls' bodies. So the police searched the park near the railroad track and around the west side of the White Oak Bayou, but they didn't find the girls. So Joe reassured Christina he would call again since the bodies weren't found after the first call to Crime Stoppers. So the following day, Joe again called Crime Stoppers, but this time giving more details as to where the girls' bodies might be located. This time during the police search, they looked along the north side of the bayou, and an officer crossed over the tracks and went down the decline and began searching along the wood line. After a few hours of Joe making that second call and 4 agonizing days of being missing, Elizabeth and Jennifer's bodies were found. Now, this is Texas.
In June.
In late June. I did look up what the weather was like on these specific days.
It's hot.
The nights were in the upper 70s and the days were pushing 90s. It was hot. Their corpses were unrecognizable. Maggots swarmed their bodies, particularly in the bloodied head areas and genital areas. While flesh did remain in some parts of the girls, there was absolutely no flesh remaining on either girl's skull by the time police recovered the bodies.
That's because everything and anything picked over them.
Yeah. And due to their advanced decomposition, dental records were going to be required in order to identify the girls. Derrick O'Brien and 2 other teen boys were seen at the scene where a large crowd was now gathering once news broke that the girls' bodies had most likely been found. Gina, the girl's friend, saw Derrick smiling as he walked away when a frantic Randy Ertman arrived at the scene. This one tugged at my heart. Kind of like your teacher case where the dad was at the school checking on his daughter. Randy showed up within an hour of hearing the police found 2 bodies. When he arrived at the tracks, he was frantically trying to get to his daughter. Police had to restrain him from getting past them because they didn't want him, first of all, to contaminate the scene.
You don't want to see that
and
either.
Second, he did not want to see what those girls look like.
No.
Now, the fellers who committed these heinous acts eventually were all arrested because Joe did turn them all in. And they were all arrested at the same time. Jose gave both a written and taped confessions, and all the men go to court, they go to trial. Those 2 boys, the twins, they testified against the gang members about what they witnessed. Not only were their own people testifying against them, but the 14-year-old, Venancio, testified against all the gang members except his brother, Jose. But Jose confessed, so they're all found guilty.
Hope they are gang raped every day.
So all the men were found guilty, right?
Mm-hmm.
The leader, Peter Anthony Cantu, Jose Ernesto Medellin, Derrick Sean O'Brien, Efrain Perez, and Raul Villarreal all received the death sentence.
Good.
Jose's brother, Venancio, he received the maximum sentence for a juvenile, because again, he was 14, of 40 years for the raping of Jennifer.
That's going to be a tough.
Yeah. Now, since Efrain and Raul were only 17 when they participated in the raping and murderings of Jennifer and Elizabeth, the U.S. Supreme Court ended up banning executions for pieces of garbage who committed despicable crimes as minors. So those 2 dipshits ended up receiving a new sentencing. Now, to me, a former death row inmate having his sentence reduced, to little old me, I'd assume their sentences would just be life in prison without parole, right?
Mm-hmm.
But no.
Well, they're not.
They're not. Jose will be eligible for parole as of October 10th, 2029, and Raul will be eligible on September 20th, 2029. That's not that far away from now.
Yeah.
Peter, Derrick, and Jose, while sitting in prison, were linked to the murder that I had mentioned before in January 1993 of Patricia Lopez, the 27-year-old, when they had abducted, gang raped, and mutilated her and then left her with her throat slashed in a Houston park.
Mm-hmm.
Now, none of the men were charged for her murder because at the time, when they linked the case to them, they were already on death row. Derrick ended up giving a taped confession to Patricia's murder, but again, he still wasn't charged with it. He also stated he was too drunk to remember who did the actual killing of Patricia. He knows they participated in the rapings and the mutilation, but he couldn't remember who actually killed her. Derrick O'Brien was the first to be put down by lethal injection on July 11th, 2006. He was pronounced dead 7 minutes after his lethal injection. I found it sad because Elizabeth's father had to deal with the anti-death penalty advocates fighting to save Derrick's worthless life. Her father said Derrick got to die peacefully. A needle went into his arm, and within 29 seconds, he was gone. He said he only wished his daughter was given that right, to just go to sleep. He also said he wished to hell that Derrick could have died the way Elizabeth had to die.
Well, I at least hope that he had to live it.
Right.
May many a penises have been gone in and out of his asshole.
And his mouth.
I hope he lost a few teeth just to make it convenient for all the fellers in that prison bathroom.
I hope they deep-throated him so much he regurgitated his lunch several times.
What?
They made him gag till he barfed with the penis.
That's the worst you could come up with?
No, you already took care of his asshole. I just figured I'd...
I did not.
You sure did. Anyway.
He's got a permanent limp. They had to wheel him in.
Next on the chopping block was Jose Medellin. He tried to use his Mexican citizen status as a way to be shipped back to Mexico after learning that the Mexican consulate could help him. His appeals failed in Texas. However, his appeals being denied and his execution date standing, it caused international controversy. And I didn't know a lot of the stuff I'm about to tell you. I realize every different country has their own judicial system of sorts. But in 2004, the International Court of Justice responded to a lawsuit Mexico filed against the U.S., demanding new hearings for certain inmates, one of which being Jose. It never dawned on me that Mexico could sue the U.S. I guess that's just me being naive. Now, I'm going to skip over most of the political back and forth drama because it's a lot. Because this goes from 1997 to now we're at 2004, and it's just constant back and forth of arguing.
Is he dead?
Texas really wanted to put Jose down.
Of course.
And everybody else was like, don't do it. It's not right. And by July 2005, the World Court, which, holy shit, there's a World Court? Didn't know that. Ordered a stay of execution for Jose. However, Governor Rick Perry argued that Texas is not bound to the World Court rulings. The death penalty opponents protested the impending execution, and the families of both Jennifer and Elizabeth were fighting to have them executed. And Jose, I am pleased to say,
is dead.
Was executed August 5th, 2008.
Way to go, Texas!
On that day, Governor Perry refused to answer his phone from anyone from Mexico or DC because as far as he was concerned, torture, rape, and murder of 2 teenage girls 15 years prior was just cause for the execution.
I agree. And you know what? More states need to take that demonstration of get her done.
Governor Perry rocks. The World Court was like, don't execute him. And he's like, bitch, please. Done. And what? I can't hear my phone ringing. I accidentally put it on vibrate. Sorry. Not sorry.
Oops, did I forget to charge it?
And then Peter Anthony Cantu, he was executed at 6:08 p.m. on August 17th, 2010 by lethal injection and pronounced dead by 6:17 p.m., so 9 minutes.
Couldn't happen to a nicer feller.
Right? Sadly, Randy Ertman, Jennifer's dad, he passed away at just 61 years old due to lung cancer on August 18th, 2014, which I'm glad he at least got to be there for the execution of the men that killed his daughter.
Unlike if they were in Utah, the people would have like a 30, 40-year waiting time, and then they'd still get a stay.
Yeah. And as for the 14-year-old that testified and helped bring all this together,
he's free.
As for him, he repeatedly has been denied parole. His last denial was in 2020, And with that being said, he will have served his entire 40-year sentence and be released without any supervision in 2034.
If he lives that long.
I hope he has a sudden heart attack or whatever, because you figure he's going to be like 45 years old when he gets out.
And what is he supposed to do?
I don't know. He's grown up in prison. Not saying that people can't be rehabilitated.
No, but what do they expect of him?
Yeah, if you cage a puppy and only poke at him through the bars and raise him around other aggressive puppies in a cell, he's not going to grow up to be a loving dog.
Where are the aggressive puppies?
The other prisoners.
But they weren't poking through the bars.
Oh, they sure weren't. They were poking through his pants. I don't know that. I'm just hopeful. But that is my case on the Black and White gang and the murders of Elizabeth Pena and Jennifer Ertman.
Pieces of shit.
Yeah. But I thought it was crazy because that was a lot of different people. It wasn't hard to keep up with, was it?
No.
Because I feel like you had your 6 main players of the gang.
You had the people who were raped, the people who did the raping, and their parents.
Yeah.
I think it only gets confusing when you keep talking about them or like by their first names. It makes more. It's easier to follow when it's like Elizabeth's dad or Elizabeth's mom rather than their first names.
Yeah.
Listening to your story makes me realize that I need to stop giving date of births. Like just what their ages are and what time period we're in, because nobody's doing the math.
Yeah. The only reason I gave the date of birth for Elizabeth and Jennifer is because they did pass away. And I feel like it's more of a respect thing for them. Not through the rest of it, telling you like their ages. It's too
many numbers.
Yeah. And then I had to dig a little bit deeper because I really was curious how old all the gang members were. And to see that the oldest child in this gang was 18. You figure you had three 18-year-old boys, 2 17-year-old boys, and a 14-year-old kid.
Yeah.
They're just a bunch of little teenage punks. They needed to be put in timeout or something.
Spanked.
I feel like they got timeout and spanked in prison, so...
They were paddled with a big dick.
Not that I cared, so I didn't add it in there, but I'll tell you. But they were all apparently remorseful as they got older.
And as they should be.
So, like, Derrick, he did apologize to the families.
No, you know why they were remorseful? Because they've been getting raped in prison for several years. So now being on the other side of it, they're real extra sorry. And they didn't even get their necks stomped in.
They just got them clogged with a penis.
They realized the gravity of what they've done because they wish they could make the raping stop, and they can't, no matter how many times they cried.
It was just really sad to read about it. And like Randy showing up at the crime scene, frantic. That made me so sad.
Yeah. He just wanted to make it all better, and he couldn't.
Yeah.
I imagine it's got to be hard for officers to be there too.
Yeah.
Because they can't unsee that.
Very sad. I'm really glad because when I was reading that the parents had formed search parties and had searched that park that the girls were found at, I was like, oh, please don't let them find their daughters. Oh my God. You want to talk about it's already what happened was already going to be hard enough to deal with. But if they were the ones that found their daughters, I was so grateful because they literally walked right past while doing the search party.
I don't know how there wasn't a smell.
So I think when the parents had searched that park, it was prior to the smell.
No.
It was the same day, basically, that the girls had been murdered. They hadn't started to stink yet. But that's all I've got. Keep your kids close. It's 10 o'clock.
And know where they are.
Yeah. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are?
I will say, having been a teenager who told some whoppers and my mom didn't know where I was and thought I was safely somewhere else, it could have happened to me. But other than, I would say, don't be out late. I mean, by all means, be over at whoever so-and-so's house, but I don't care where you are. Nothing good happens after midnight.
Yeah.
And walking to wherever they were supposed to be originally, probably not the best idea.
I'm not blaming the parents in any way, shape, or form. I realize times have changed.
Not really.
I don't think Mom would have ever let us walk. Granted, we did grow up in the middle of nowhere, so there wouldn't have been too many places to walk. But even if it was just a little over a mile away, I don't think Mom would have been okay with us walking.
But that's where I was saying there were plenty of times I did stuff Mom didn't know about and she would not have said okay to. But that's why she didn't know about them.
But these parents were aware of the situation. Like, the girls had an 11:30 curfew that they were supposed to be back home. It's not like the girls drove. So how did the parents think they were getting back home? They were going to walk. And the parents assumed, I guess, that because were two of them, there was safety in having someone with them. And
Yeah.
it was sad. I'm glad the pieces of shit that were on death row have been executed.
Yeah, and at the same time, with the whole Mom wouldn't let us go anywhere, that like 2 streets over, it was well over a mile. I would ride my bike over to her house and I was by myself. And I rode on the road.
Yeah, I did that.
Almost ran smack into a mailbox several times. But like I was by myself. So
I walked over there. I think we went together a couple times just to putz around to the street next to the street we grew up on. But that was a ways away. And then we walked the loop and it came out where it circled around. That was far.
Yeah, I mean, that was more than a mile.
And there were no sidewalks.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying that. I mean, mind you, I wouldn't have done that at 11 o'clock because it would have given me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, same.
There would have been not one chance. Yeah, during the day, I mean, that was different. But 11 o'clock at night, if I told Mom that, like, I'll just walk, you're right. No. One of those twigs moved in the night, and I would have sprinted right back to anywhere. That shit would have been the creepiest walk. I can't even bring my trash can down the driveway.
Well, to be fair, you currently have quite the distance to go.
Right. And then when it gets into the dark, there's some weird shit in there.
Hey, question. Are you scared of the dark because of critters or people?
Yes.
So I know as a kid, I used to be afraid of taking the trash outside, even though it was like right outside the kitchen door. I hated when it had to be the furthest trash can that was down by the deck stairs because I was always scared that something or someone was going to pop up from the stairs.
Well, that fear has also been reinforced by fucking stupid ass birds nesting in spots. So when I open up that door and they start fluttering, it scares the daylight out of you.
For me, it was a raccoon popped out of the trash can because our brother didn't put the other lid on. And when I was walking past that trash can to the other one, it popped out of the open trash can and scared the crap out of me because there was no way to get back inside. The raccoon was between me and the kitchen door. And it was like, whoa. But thankfully, that raccoon just wanted to haul ass away from me.
Also, seen a coyote come out of one of the trash cans at the end of the driveway. So it's just like, yes, to all of the things. But that's also being aware of my surroundings. I'm so hyper aware that all the broken twig sounds and the whoo.
Question. What? Do you think those of us that survived and realize our close calls as teenagers is why there's so many whiny titty babies as adults raising whiny titty babies as children now?
I would have to categorize it as game knows game, and we are privy to how we got around, and that just sounds wrong. How we snuck around, or the tales told, or what we were up to, and are aware of the things you can be up to.
So you were the bad kid. I was a good kid.
You're right.
I was.
Tell me again what you chiseled into your soap.
Okay, that was in the house. I'm talking about the sneaking around. Mom always knew where I was. She did. I never lied to her.
That's what made her suspicious that you were lying.
I know.
She just thought you were a master at it. She couldn't catch you in your lies.
To me, it was just easier to tell the truth. I remember there was one time she found wine cooler under your bed.
Oh, yeah.
She blamed me for that.
Naturally.
I didn't even live there anymore.
That's why she thought you smuggled it in. Got it from somewhere.
That's what I did. I brought a wine cooler over and hid it under your bed.
Yeah, and you know what? Fucking ants.
I was just about to say, yeah, she blamed me for that.
Well, the ants, they were all in there. Anybody need an ant trap, use a strawberry daiquiri, because that's really what it was.
Yeah.
That was also disgusting. That's why it was under the bed.
It's nothing like the real thing. But anyway, have you a good day, and I will talk to you in a second. When you call me.
Thank you for listening to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Claire.
I'm Andy.
Follow us each week to get your fix of the atrocities that occur in true crime. And don't forget to tell people about us and rate us if you like us. But don't rate us if you didn't. Just change the channel.